guys. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Caroline. I am the ASG for Crisis. I am a junior at Point Loma High School. I use the pronoun she or they, fine with either. And I'm really happy that you came. And then the teachers can go ahead and introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Sierra Crochane. I'm a senior at Point Loma High School. I'm going to be the head chair for the American side of the Joint Crisis Committee this year. And my pronouns are she, her, and I look forward to working with you guys this year.
Hi, so I'm Ben Gonzalez. I am a senior at Patrick Henry High School, and I will be serving as one of your co-crisis directors for this crisis. You're not going to really see me as much. You're going to see your head chair, but I look forward to taking a look at your directives and seeing what I can do with them. Oh, and my pronouns are he, him.
I'm Paul Miram. I'm also a senior at Henry, and I'm your assistant director. My pronouns are also he, him. Nice to have you here.
All right, so for table of contents, we have our introduction, points and motions, and rules of procedure are the three main points that we're going to be going over today. So first, introduction. So basically, a crisis committee in general, what even is a crisis committee? So first of all, the exact rules of procedure for a crisis committee. A lot of the time, people tend to look at crisis committees as being really goal-oriented and individual-oriented. And the rules of procedure tend to center around that, the motives of the individual, and in this case, the motives of the characters. For example, we'll go more into detail on the rules of procedure in later slides, but the debate will focus not only on collaboration with other delegates in a really formal setting in unmoderated caucuses, which we'll talk about later, but also on very free speeches that focus on primarily moderated and unmoderated caucuses. So the rules of procedure are going to kind of lay out what that is. So why are these rules of procedure important, and why do we need to know them? So having a really good grasp of exactly why we go through the motions that we go through is a key to understanding why your characters have to go through these events and why they have to pursue their own goals. And being able to understand these rules will help you kind of navigate these waters of how to advance your own directives, how to advance your own side's policy and your own side's motives. So that's essential for this particular crisis. So for using placards, this is the same thing as General Assembly. You'll have a placard with your character's name on it, and then whenever you want to be called on, you raise your placard when your head chair says, are there any points or motions on the floor? And then speaking in third person, this same thing goes as with General Assembly. When you raise your placard and your head chair calls on you, then you say, for example, Alexander Hamilton or George Washington, maybe you're any character, then you say, moves or motions to be added to the speakers list, which there is none, so that's a bad example. Moves to have an unmoderated caucus or moves to have a moderated caucus, etc. So make sure that you don't say I, me, my, ever. And those are the main points. And now we'll get into points and motions.
Okay, so yeah, points and motions. So what are points and motions? They're just formal language used to raise concerns and ask for clarification. So it's the same thing as a regular committee. There's not special points or motions really for a crisis committee. So if you've been in a regular committee, it's just the same thing. So examples of points and motions. So if you want to raise a concern, you wouldn't say I have a question. You'd raise your placard or whatever and say point of inquiry, point of personal privilege, or point of order. And then if you want to suggest an action or something like that, you would motion to open debate or to change the speaking time in the same way.
All right, so ROP, rules of procedure. For crisis, it is a bit different than General Assembly, so we'll continue. So just some of the things that embody ROP. We'll begin with roll call. So that's pretty much the same as a General Assembly committee. You get called by your character instead of a country, and you can either say that you are present or present in voting. In crisis, rather than voting on resolutions, we vote on group or committee directives. And so we'll go more into that later. Comments, again, sort of on a speech, you might give a comment. They're just like really small speeches typically. Questions, typically in General Assembly, questions are asked when resolutions are being presented. But in crisis, they are, since there are no resolutions, that's not when they're asked. Typically, questions will be asked when there's a crisis update. So the crisis director, and the rest of my staff will, show up, give a crisis update, and then we'll typically entertain anywhere from 2 to 4 questions, depending on how significant the crisis update was. And they're just for you, the delegates, to get more information about the crisis update. Moderated caucuses. Crisis sits in a perpetual moderated caucus. So at any point, when people are raising, giving points and motions, you can give a speech. But you can also create moderated caucuses in crisis with a specific topic in mind. Unmod caucuses work largely the same as General Assembly. You're free to move around, or in person. Start gathering in blocks, talk it out. Round robin is something that's much more prevalent in crisis committees. Typically, you will go one by one in terms of delegates, and it's usually used to get like everyone's perspective on a certain issue or to get an introduction from everyone. However, they can also work sort of as Socratic seminars. It more depends on what the head chair and the delegates have in mind. Amendments. So again, without resolutions, there are no amendments to resolutions. However, committee directives, like I said, are sort of like the new resolutions, and those can be amended, both again, friendly and unfriendly. And then voting block, again, instead of voting for resolutions, you vote for committee directives. And the directives, again, are basically just like tiny resolutions that are done either by single delegates, so single characters, a pair or a group, or a whole committee. And what they do is they're your way to sort of affect change in our little crisis world. And your actions actually will have direct effects and consequences based through the form of crisis updates. So directive is the way that you manage that. Communiques are like directives, but they're more like little like messages sent to people that don't actually exist in the committee typically. So if you are Alexander Hamilton and you want to write to the French ambassador, but the French ambassador isn't an actual delegate, then you can do a communique and crisis staff will sort of act as the French ambassador. Again, amendments we already covered, voting block already covered, and then other terms. Decorum is sort of just the etiquette and the sort of order of committee, and the head chair is in charge of maintaining decorum. And if they say decorum and they slam their gavel, typically they want you to quiet down. And dilatory, the head chair has the power to rule something dilatory if he or she feels that it violates the flow of committee or it is just against ROP in general, but that's at their discretion.
Here's the basic vocabulary for the rules of procedure. The rules of procedure are just the set of rules and guidelines that all committees go by. The placard is the piece of paper that'll have like your name, your character's name. A point is raising concern, like I gave you the examples earlier of a point of inquiry. A motion is to suggest something, so like motioning to lengthen debate or start a round robin or something like that. And then the present, that has to do with the present voting during roll call, which again, if you're present voting, that just means you have to vote on committee directives. If you're present, then you have the option. Abstaining is if you're present, you can abstain and not vote. Speakers list, crisis doesn't really have a speakers list, so we don't really go over that. Yield, you can still yield your time if you're giving a speech to another delegate. And then right of reply, this one doesn't really happen too often. If you were personally attacked in some way, then you can try and issue a right of reply. And it's kind of up to the chair's discretion if they believe you're attacked enough that you can reply. And then a moderated caucus, again, doesn't happen as much in crisis, more of round robins, but it works the same way as a normal committee where you just, there's just speakers who present about the directives.
All right, so for the basic points and motions for crisis, we have like a couple of main points that are going to be made in committee. So one of the main ones is unmoderated caucuses. And as, well, I guess I wasn't brought up before. So basically, unmoderated caucuses are the time where delegates get to convene and, like Ben said, form caucus blocks and align with your fellow members within your committee. And obviously this is a joint crisis committee, so this will be within your committee as the rest of these terms will be your side, I should say. So during moderated caucuses, obviously this is going to be on Zoom, so we're not going to talk about the logistics of it quite yet, but if you want to actually initiate an unmoderated caucus, then you raise your placard, as we talked about before, and say that your person moves for an unmoderated caucus, and you have to say the duration of time. So say like 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Generally, it is a longer period of time than you're used to in crisis as opposed to a General Assembly. So sometimes it can be like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, because this is the time where people generally write their directives, if that's personal or if it's committee directives, and really get the feel for exactly what direction they want to take history in. So next is moderated caucuses, and as was brought up before, basically crisis is in a perpetual moderated caucus. So this means instead of going back to a speakers list as in General Assembly, you'll automatically default back to a moderated caucus when some motion is not brought up in the committee room, which is more rare. Generally, the debate is centered around like really specific pinpointed moderated caucuses. So a delegate might bring up a moderated caucus with a really specific like subtopic of whatever is being brought up in committee. So for example, for the American Revolution, if you happen to be talking about the battles in like Lexington and Concord, and obviously history will not follow, as in committee will not follow actual history. So for example, if one delegate wants to bring up the fact that there's this like subversive organization that's popping up and like spreading like propaganda about these two battles, and for example, if you have to follow the format and they want to address that particular topic, they could say so the name of the character, I always use Alexander Hamilton, classic in this example, moves for a 10-minute moderated caucus with a speaking time of 1 minute on the topic of addressing the like subversive organization regarding the battles of Lexington and Concord, and then your vice chair or page will write down the topic, the speaking time, and the number of minutes, and basically then that would mean that there are going to be 10 speakers, and then after that you'll go into voting on whichever motion is the most appealing, and then people raise their placards for or against that particular motion, and whichever one passes is what you go into, and then subsequently delegates will raise their placards to be added to the list of people who will speak on that particular moderated caucus, and in that case those are the two main things that you'll be going over in crisis. And then in changing the number, there can be comments on speeches, and obviously the number of speeches. And as I brought up before, for that particular example, if there is a 10-minute moderated caucus with a speaking time of 1 minute, then there'll be 10 speakers. And at any point, you can also raise your placard and change that number from 10 to 5, or you can change the speaking time to maybe 30 seconds instead of a minute. And if people vote on it and it passes, then that moderated caucus will change. And then changing the duration, I just basically covered that exact thing. You can also change the number of speeches, number of comments for speeches. And in general, comments are usually around 2 per speech if you do decide to have them for your moderated caucus, as brought up by the person who initiates the moderated caucus. So then the points of personal privilege, this is if you have to like use the bathroom. This is not like a main point for moderated caucus. And this can also be to, it's mostly just addressing the dais directly as opposed to the committee. And then the points of order. So this is something it's also not brought up very often. If the head chair, if someone does something incorrectly that's not adhering to the rules of procedure, then you can say so via point of order. And yeah, those are the main things.
All right, so what are your next steps as delegates? First and foremost, get your resources prepared. So in crisis, research, like that's super key. Anything that you think might be able to help you, whether it's, geographic maps of a certain area that you think you could use in a battle, or the technology from the time. Like anything that you can think of, you can probably find a way to utilize. And the more specific and the more accurate that your directives are, the more successful they will be. Look out for upcoming crisis announcements. So whether that is an announcement regarding the logistics of the online platform that we'll use, or perhaps we'll release your portfolio powers, anything like that, just keep an eye out. Go to office hours for help or advice. So office hours are hosted by both of the crisis chairs, Freddie and Sierra. And if you ever are confused or have any questions about maybe what's possible, what's not possible, what your character can do, they should be able to help out. Go to office hours. And then the date of the conference has been moved up, if you haven't heard, to May 12th and through the 13th. So clear your schedules. Make sure that you know that now it is sooner than it was supposed to be, so that you don't miss it. And other than that, thank you guys. Thank you guys for coming. We appreciate you taking the time to look at this, and we hope that you learn a lot. And if you have any questions, again, feel free to go to office hours or shoot someone an email.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.